Hi everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. Get out your folding chairs, get out your ringside seats, and all of the things because we're talking about wrestling comics on this episode. I'm delighted to be talking with comics creator Michael Kingston. Michael, thank you for jumping in and joining.
How you doing, man? Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure, my pleasure. Doing good, doing good. Uh, Folks out there will know you for something called Headlocked Comics. So please tell us a little bit about this before we get into some of your creator origins.
Um, yeah, I was a fan of wrestling for a long time, and I was a fan of comics for a long time, and I felt like everybody made shitty wrestling comics, and so I just decided to make my own, and I kind of just built this little niche in my little corner of the world that, I kind of rule over, and I make comics about wrestling. I make comics with wrestlers. I co-create comics with wrestlers, all kinds of stuff. And yeah, I bring wrestlers to conventions. It's been a fun little journey.
Yeah, yeah, I love that marriage of comics and wrestling because, of course, I loved both of those growing up. And there's something about, especially not the MMA fighting quite as much, although that's there in like Batman versus Bane. But there's something about like the costume kind of interactions and the rivalries and all of that kind of thing that really plays nicely into comics.
It's funny though too, because I mean I had such a hard time getting Headlocked off the ground. Like I mean I have met resistance from every major publisher I talked to. I mean everybody was kind of rough about it when I started. Like
Huh.
stores, store in my own town wouldn't carry the book for me.
Wow.
Lots of I mean a dude from a major publisher literally laughed at my face.
Huh.
I mean, I got shot down by everybody in a brutal fashion. So I just built it myself. You know what I mean? I started selling out of my backpack at wrestling shows, and I started doing conventions and just building a following, like, hand selling, hand selling, hand selling. And um, it worked out. I set up at wrestling shows, I set up at Comic Cons, and then a lot of wrestlers who like comics would find my books and they would buy them from me at shows because they would be at Comic Con as a fan. And
Wow.
then it kind of just grew from there. Then they wanted to make comics with me, and then we started making comics, and it's been a an unconventional journey, I guess, but it ended up so much better than I've ever expected, wildly exceeding my best expectations.
Lovely. I love the good ending of it all, and of course, it's not the ending. There's still creating to do, but curious about some of those collaborations that you were talking about. How did you start making some of those connections, and at what point did you know, hey, this is a thing that's happening?
So the first, um, so when I first had Headlock, my first book was called Headlocked, and then I was out doing that, and then people would get it from me, like Hurricane bought one from me, and Rob Van Dam, and Christopher Daniels, some of those OG wrestling and comic guys,
Mm-hmm.
and then I think my first real collaboration was with Jerry the King Lawler, and he did the covers to a lot of my books. And that was just I mean, believe it or not, that was just a cold email. Like I forgot I did it after I did
Nice.
it. It was such a lark. I knew he was an artist and I had seen a lot of his art over the years. And I was like, you know what? I knew he was a comic book fan. He had a Superman ring and everything. So I was like, let me give this a shot. And so I sent him an email through his website. Like it was like 2 in the morning one night. I was like, what the hell? And like I forgot I did it after I did it. And then like a week later I got an email back and he's like, in my mind it's like a webmaster or something, but it was him. And he's like, here's my address, send me some books and I'll take a look at them. And then I sent him some books, and then like a week after that, like he called me up and he was like, yeah, I'll totally do it. And so he started
Nice.
doing covers for me, and then we started doing cons together, and then that really kind of really kind of put me on a different level
Hmm.
because now I'm at a table with Jerry Lawler, and then people are trying my book out because of the connection, and then I have more cachet with wrestlers when I'm talking to them because like, oh well, Jerry thinks he's okay. From the beginning, I mean, everybody in the wrestling business was so good to me. I mean, stark contrast to the comic book business, really, but
Interesting. Yeah.
like I mean, they've always treated me like one of the boys. Yeah, I've been in locker rooms and I've been guests to backstage at shows and stuff. And it's a wild thing. Like, I just wanted to make a cool wrestling comic and I never thought like I would be, friends with people that I grew up watching on TV or,
Mhm.
just I mean the sort of best thing that you could ever hope for, I think, as a creator, obviously beyond that, that life-changing contract that like one out of a million people get. But
Right, right.
the is to be able to be respected by creators that you respect. Like
Hmm.
that makes it all worth it, right? When somebody like one of the first San Diego Comic Cons I did, like Joe Lansdale came by my booth, and I gave him a copy of our first trade, and he wrote back to tell me how much he enjoyed it and how much he said, this is a great piece of work, Matt, much respect. And I mean, how
Yeah,
much you can't get better than that, right? Like
yeah.
that's so. I mean, that part of it, that's been like the most fulfilling part of the journey more than anything else. Like, it's just knowing that there are people out there, that respect me for what I do, and they're people that
Mhm.
I respect, and that's that's the juice, man.
Yeah, yeah. I remember Ultimate Warrior and Jake the Snake, and I also remember the Sting phenomenon in the '90s where he kind of looked like the Crow a little bit.
Hmm.
So those overlaps are definitely there. Were there wrestlers that you were especially connected to as a kid growing up and watching the sport?
I mean, it's a long journey, right? So like, I
Yeah.
mean, at 8 years old, I thought Georgie Animal Steel, like he was the guy that made me a wrestling fan, like made me stop. I think, you know, like when you're flipping channels, right? Like you're just kind of scrolling through to see what's on TV. Like you need that thing to make you stop. And
Hmm.
he was the
Hmm.
thing that made me stop flipping channels. And then, whatever. I think, Hulk Hogan was a thing, and I like Tito Santana a lot and whatever. And then like as you get older, your tastes change. And I mean it's more complicated for me now because I'm friends with almost everybody in wrestling. So like
Yeah.
it's a it's a different vibe. But like for me, like Hurricane, he did a superhero, the sort of believes he's a superhero gimmick or whatever, and who's sort of played for comedy, but he was the comic book guy. Green
Hmm.
Lantern tattooing on his arm, whatever, and I loved him. And now like he's one of my best friends.
Yeah.
Um, which is such a crazy thing. Like, um, and yeah, so I mean, like those are the guys that I gravitated to. I always had a soft spot in my heart for the wrestlers that I knew that like comics, just because like even when wrestling was popular, I mean, it's so mainstream now and so ubiquitous, it's hard to imagine. But even when it was popular, it was never cool. Like even to the
Yeah.
Hulk Hogan era and stuff, like you'd still get made fun of in high school, like Steve Austin era. I was in college and people still gave me a hard time about being a wrestling fan. And I mean, comics, I mean, maybe the MCU has kind of made comics a little more respectable for people and
Hmm.
whatever. But for a long time, I mean, you were a double nerd. And so, like,
Yeah.
when you met somebody that liked both of those things, you were instantly brothers.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I became friends with like Rob Van Dam, like immediately, right? Like, and the same thing with Hurricane and AJ Styles and Samoa Joe, like, just because you were like, oh yeah, we both like these double nerd things. We had years of persecution, and now, this is my brother, and it just became such an easy way to get to know people. So those were the guys that sort of I gravitated to, early on. And then yeah, I mean now I'm just kind of everybody's cool.
Yeah, yeah. Have you found that space of community in the comics world as well?
I mean, I have people that I'm tight with, but I mean, I barely exist in comics. I sell most of my stuff direct to consumer. I do Kickstarter, I do Comic Cons, I sell my stuff for wrestling shows.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's tends to be how I've existed. I actually have a book coming out in 8 days through Diamond. And it's the first book that I've had of my own or whatever, not my own, but that I'm like the lead creator on. I did some WWE comics for Boom, but those are mostly anthologies and stuff.
Hmm.
So it
Hmm.
wasn't like I had to carry it, but I have a book, coming out in 8 days, which is the first book I've had in Diamond since the original Headlock books. So it's it's a little daunting, but yeah, I mean, over the years, I mean, I've made friends with a lot of creators, and there's people I can, there's people I collaborate with, and there's people I know I can send ideas to, and bounce ideas off of. So
Yeah. Anything about the book in 8 days, as well as the creative vision that you'd like to share?
So it's called Vampiro Rockabilly Apocalypse, and it's I'm writing it for Mass Republic, and it's coming out through Massive Publishing, and it's Vampiro is one of the most famous luchadors in Mexico. Not Mexican himself, but a huge, I mean, huge star down there. He's still got a Spanish language podcast down there that's insanely popular. He was a big part of Lucha Underground and WCW towards the end of it. So this they had asked me to come up here at the time, and this has been almost 4 years in the making, I think, to get it to where it's at. But he was hosting a punk and rockabilly radio show in Mexico. It was very popular, and they were like, "Oh, well, Mass Republic came to me, and they're like, "Oh, pitch me Rockabilly Vampiro."
Mhm.
And so I conceived this idea of Vampiro as an underground rockabilly guitarist who sort of just shows up places and plays like kind of if you know kind of thing. He's never on the poster. He just shows up and plays like these nightclubs and dives and be like a legendary guitarist. And then at night, he hunts monsters with his guitar, which converts into a literal axe. And
Mhm.
so that was the sort of starting point. And then he inadvertently sort of uncovers a plot to jumpstart the apocalypse. And this is the first thing that I've done that isn't like wrestling in nature. Obviously, Vampiro is a wrestler, but there's very minimal wrestling in this. There's some, in some of the fight scenes we incorporate some moves, but like for the most part, this is very much a Dusk Till Dawn style, like sort of action comedy horror type thing. And I've had, I've been collecting comics my whole life since I was 8. And obviously everything I write is wrestling oriented, but obviously I've been storing away all sorts of weird ideas over the years in hopes that at some point I'd be able to put them to good use. And, we packed a lot of weirdness into this. He's being pursued by a motorcycle gang of nuns that have shotguns. His There's a lot of I packed a ton of weird, just fun grindhouse type ideas into it, and it's like I said, it's a little funny and it's a little horror and it's a lot of action. I tell people it's Preacher meets Cannonball Run,
Nice.
um, and then sort of tonally, it's very much tonally very similar to Dust Till Dawn, with that kind of it's got that kind of vibe. And it's so much fun to write. I'm in the middle of 7 projects right now, and I always love when I get to, when it's time to work on this book because it's just been so much fun to just make it as weird as possible. And Vampiro's a weird dude. Like he's into like occult and ancient alien stuff and whatever. So like anytime you talk with him, he's like it's just like a trip. And then he's also like incredible. He's got an incredible amount of personal charisma. Like he's just a magnetic dude, which is why he's been so successful. I mean, that's the thing that separates like people that are capable wrestlers versus like people who are superstars. Right? Like The Rock always had that sort of charisma from the time that he started. And Hulk Hogan is the same way, right? Like Ric Flair, they just have that charisma, and Vampiro has it. He's got whatever it is that you could never bottle, and so injecting his personality into this character and then having it exist in this sort of world has been just an unbelievably fun time. And then he's a
Nice.
vampire, right? So we can, when we're done with this arc is 10 issues. It's double sized first issue, double sized last issue. So first issue, 48 pages, it's $5. It's a hell of a deal.
That is.
And we have a cover painted by Rafael Galor, who used to paint the Frazetta style fantasy covers for Lucha magazines back in the day. And he did an incredible cover for us. And he's doing, so we have 2 of those guys. There's Galore and Pegaso, and they're sort of Galore's doing 2 covers, and Pegaso's doing 2 covers, and Galore's back on issue 5, and whatever. And the covers are worth the price of admission alone. But yeah, It's been super, super fun. And so when we're done with this arc, I could write it forever. We can put Vampiro in the future. We can put him in the past. He's a vampire. And
Mhm.
you know what I mean? He can exist wherever. So, I mean, I kind of feel like it would be super fun to bring like some sort of rockabilly sensibility to like a future arc or something, some kind of future story and whatever. But like we can literally, I mean, there's no limit to what we can do. So, um, yeah, it's been great. It's been some of the most fun I've had making comics, and everybody that's read it has loved it. So I can't wait for people to see it.
Cool. Well, if I'm somebody out there and I want to see more, if I want to visit and kind of check things out, are there go-to convention spaces that you found as well as spaces online where I might go?
Well, we're on all the socials, Headlock Comic or whatever. But I mean, I do tons of conventions. I'm probably gonna do 30 this year. I was just
Wow.
in Bangor, Maine. I just did 5 shows in 6 weeks. And then I have this week off, and then I have New York Comic Con. We have a huge space at New York Comic Con. Vampiro will be there with us signing the first issue. We're doing a signing on the launch day on Wednesday at the Wrestling Universe in Brooklyn, and then we're doing, or not Brooklyn, Queens, and then we're doing the day one of New York Comic Con. But yeah, I mean, I always try to be out and on the road. I think for me, like I feel like I make really cool stuff. And I think
Yeah.
if you like wrestling, I think you'll love my books. But it's also hard when you don't sort of exist in comics. So like for me, like just getting out and, hitting the personal touch. I mean, that's how I've grown for years. And I mean, I love the travel anyway. So
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
love being amongst my people. Um, so I mean, I played football in college. I managed warehouses and truck drivers and whatever. So like Comic Con is my chance to be around my people, the people who I vibe with more than any other. So I love doing shows and I love just being out. So, you know, um, what do I have for the rest of the year? I have New York, Twin Cities in Minneapolis, WrestleCade in Winston-Salem, and then GalaxyCon Columbus. So I still got a bunch of shows. Oh, and Memphis Comic Con I just added today because
Nice.
it's the week
Nice.
after New York, just because I'm a glutton for punishment. But I, uh, I, I grew up poor and I didn't go anywhere. I was 31 the first time I went to New York City, and I lived 2.5 hours north of it. Right, like it
Yeah.
was just travel wasn't a thing that we were able to do.
Hmm.
And now
Hmm.
I've been everywhere, because I make comics in my bedroom. I've been like by the end of this year, I'll have 8 states left that I haven't been to, which
Wow.
is insane. You know what I mean? I've been to like 10 new places. I was a guest at a wrestling convention in Australia earlier this year. Um, and I mean, that just on top of how much fun making comics is and producing comics and whatever, like just the sidebars. I've met so many famous people and they I've been treated like an equal with people that are way above my station. I sort of exist in the space I have no business existing in for a guy that makes comics out of his bedroom. And I've gotten to see so much of the world that I never got to see growing up. So um
Cool.
it's been a ride.
And it all started with comics and wrestling.
Yeah, the things I mean it's the things that I love. Two of the things that I love more than anything. And they brought me so much joy. Like I just, I got my comps for Vampiro came yesterday.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
like there's nothing that I love more than just opening that first box of comics and then just catching that like every book
Yeah.
has like a different smell, but they're all sort of familiar, paper, whatever, ink. But like I don't know. Like to me, just that's it's such an incredible feeling. You're like, oh, this box is full of stuff that I made.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very cool. Yeah. And you get to share it out with fandom and build that community too and introduce new generations. It's a very cool thing.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the response to Vampiro has been great. Like we've already had some interest in it from other parties and stuff, and the people that have read it, I mean, we've had some really good endorsements from some big, Steve Orlando and Danhausen as a wrestler. uh, the guy that plays Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies and whatever. We've had some really good people who've got to read some advanced copies and been like, oh, this is great. And that's, I think as a creator, you're always nervous, right?
Yeah.
Everything is always nerve-wracking until somebody's read it.
Hmm.
Because there's part of you that's like, oh, this sucks and everybody's going to hate it. And then there's part of it that's just like, well, maybe I'm just a little too in love with my own stuff. So you really kind of need that sort of external, a couple people to be like, oh yeah, this is great. And it's not like you can't ask like family members because they're going to tell you, you know what I mean? Like you need
Right.
sort of outside people to sort of give you a little bit of validation to where you be like, okay, maybe I can puff my chest out a little bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I love the way the passion comes through too. And I love the story of persevering when people didn't quite see the vision that you had. So that's also an incredible mark for you as well.
I do a lot of panels at shows now about breaking into comics and like not like the higher end, but just people that have a dream that think it might be something they want to do, and it's sort of half instructional and half inspirational, and like, I mean, because it really has never been easier to make your own comic. It's probably
Hmm.
never been harder to find your own audience because there's so much stuff out there and there's people that are making so much stuff. But I mean, if you want to make some, you can make some, but you can't just put it out there and expect that people are going to flock to it. You gotta stand in front of people and be like, yo, look at this or
Hmm.
whatever, or have some sort of hook or some sort of whatever to get people. I was lucky that, I wanted to, I mean, I kind of built the sort of modern wrestling and comic space because there was nobody.
Yeah.
People occasionally somebody would do a licensed book or something like that, but you can always tell when something's made for money and something's made for
Hmm.
love.
Hmm.
Um, and that's the thing I always, you know, all the wrestlers I collaborate with like comics, they like storytelling, whatever. All the artists I work with like wrestling, like I don't, you know, I don't ever want anybody coming through just for a paycheck.
Yeah.
And I've had wrestlers who want their stuff to be more of a vanity project, and that's not what I do. So, just like, yeah, all right, well, maybe this isn't for us.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
I want people to be excited about what they do and be into it and whatever. I feel like that stuff. And obviously, I'm right in it, neck deep in it. So I see it and I know, you hope that it comes across in the work. But I mean, everybody, like, so many wrestlers love comics. So, like, the idea that we collaborated on something is, you know, cool
Yeah.
for them too.
Definitely. Definitely. Well, I appreciate the time, Michael, and I appreciate the creating. Have we missed anything that you want to mention that's on the horizon or anything like that before we close out?
So my next book that's coming out after Vampiro is going to be through Kickstarter, and it's called Friday Night Bigfoot, and it's about
Nice.
a promoter in Portland in 1985 who trains Bigfoot to wrestle to save his family-owned promotion from getting swallowed up by the big incoming corporate national juggernaut. And we get Bigfoot hooked on coke pretty early because it's the 80s. We
Yeah.
open the story with Bigfoot in rehab if you want to get an idea of the tone of this story. But it's very much a story about this family and and Bigfoot is just a fun part of it, like superstardom goes to Bigfoot's head and he's kind of an asshole backstage and whatever, like it's just the absurdity of it, right? Like, I mean, that's the beauty of comics, right? Like, I mean, why
You can
not?
do it. Yeah.
You can do anything, right? Like, I mean, why not? And so many people are just like, oh, this is my version of Batman, but like, I don't know, I just feel like why not just do something nuts.
Yeah.
So it's been pretty incredible. I've been so I'm excited for that. I think people are going to be excited when they see we have an incredible shirt design. We've got Andy Bollinger, Maria Wolf did a cover for it. Tony Gregori's drawing it in between Rick and Morty stints from IDW. So we've got some great creators on it. I'm real excited for that. And then
Yeah.
we have Tales from the Road Volume 4 coming out. I'm co-creating stories with Jordan Grace, Danhausen, Shelton Benjamin, bunch of there's some reprint material, Jerry Lawler, Brody King, bunch of people. I'm always tinkering with the lineup, but I've probably got enough content to do 4 and 5 right now. But So you always try to find like the people that play well together, have like some kind of a vein in between them, and then
Hmm.
working on volume 5 for Headlocked. And then I have two big license projects that I can't talk about yet, um, but they're going to be newsworthy. So
Cool. Many projects, it sounds like circling and some multitasking on your part as well.
I don't sleep. I mean, the thing about me is obviously so a lot of people don't know, but I still work full time. Like I manage a fleet of
Wow.
truck drivers through Target, and I haven't had a day off from work since April of 2023.
Wow.
So I work full time and I got 7 projects I'm working on. I'm going to do 30 conventions this year. I don't sleep a whole lot, but I've also, it's also exactly what I want. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I like having the security of having a full-time job. Obviously, during COVID, a lot of people took it hard, and I still
Hmm.
didn't have to worry about my lights getting turned off. Um, so it's a, it's an unconventional lifestyle, but I do what I have to do to make it work. And like I said, if it all ended tomorrow, it's been incredible. So, but
Absolutely. Absolutely.
thankfully, right now, it feels like I've never been busier. So I'm also, you know, I'm never going to complain about that.
And may the journey continue. May it continue for a long time to come.
That's the hope.
Yes, sir. Well, glad to have you back anytime and safe travels to the multiple conventions. And may the multitasking be with you as well.
Thank you so much. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Yes, absolutely.